some effort is motion. Hands move, days fill. It feels like work, but without vector, rhythm, without arrival. Other effort is frantic, reactive, it makes noise and little change. Then there is shaped practice, small constraints, clear feedback, patient repetition. Direction matters more than volume. Structure turns scattered energy into compound outcome. Force without form exhausts. Form without force is brittle. If effort is energy, shape is the lens that focuses it. Which leads us to a quieter hinge, the meaning that orients attention. Meaning is not a slogan. It's a quiet compass. It chooses what you notice. It makes some struggles legible and others meaningless noise. Aligned meaning narrows attention. It turns repetition into refinement. It spares energy for what endures. It explains setbacks so they teach instead of merely tire. Not every aim survives that sorting. But what remains gains depth. Where does your compass point, and what small acts does it let you keep doing?
Effort is not a single thing. There's motion that only fills minutes, frantic tasks, repeated gestures that leave you tired and unchanged. There's disciplined practice, narrow, noisy at first, shaped by feedback and small thresholds. And there's ritualized repetition, motion with meaning, the steady turning of a key until the lock yields. Direction and frame decide which of these grows. Quantity alone won't tell you. Look at what your days rehearse. Notice the pattern. What kind of effort are you unknowingly training? All of those efforts need a north. Meaning is that quiet compass. Not a slogan. Not a plan. A way attention arranges itself. It makes some choices habitual and lets others vanish. It decides what you return to after failure. Aligned effort accumulates. Misaligned effort dissipates. Meaning doesn't promise results. It simply orients. It lets small repeats compound. Ask yourself, not how hard you work, but what your work is pointing toward. If meaning is a compass, attention is the carrier that walks its path. Attention is scarce. It fragments easily. New things roar, old things whisper. Our inner stories, what we imagine we are, pull focus like magnets. Left unguided, attention chases novelty. It chases anxiety. It chases anything that promises a quick end. But when attention is oriented by meaning, it compounds. Small, simple acts stack. They change the field around them. The room responds. Feedback arrives. Momentum forms not from force, but from repeated witnessing. This is less about piling up hours and more about where your hours settle. Notice where you return. Notice what gets protected when you are tired. Then ask, quietly, what does my attention say I care about? Attention chooses. Identity authorizes. We do the things that make sense to the person we imagine ourselves to be. Small acts become believable when they fit that self-image. They stop feeling like effort and start feeling like evidence. This is where stories live. Not the loud ones, but the quiet narratives that run in the background, the one that says, I am someone who finishes, or I am the sort of person who tries and abandons. Jung called the parts we hide the shadow. Frankl pointed to meaning that survives suffering. Both remind us, who we are shapes what endures. So notice the story behind your doing. Test it gently. Wear a small habit and see if it feels true. If it doesn't, ask, what identity would make this matter? Now consider the structures that translate belief into change. Identity gives permission. Structure supplies the mileage. Feedback loops, tiny signals that tell you whether a move landed, are merciless and kind. Thresholds set the doorways. Make them low enough to enter. Make them exact enough to teach. Deliberate practice is less about sweat and more about frames. Repeat, notice, adjust. Over time, these small cycles carve clarity where blind effort once thudded against a wall. Systems tame willpower. They turn meaning into measurable rhythm. They keep the story honest. Start with one loop. Let it be small. Let it be visible. Then wait. Listen for what it tells you. And let that answer guide the next small thing. Structures ask for signals. Stories keep the signals legible. When you tell a different story about a thing, the noise rearranges itself. A journal makes a stretch of days into a scene. A ritual punctuates a restless mind. Small ceremonies, a kettle, a list, a 5-minute read, turn isolated acts into a continuing plot. That continuity is the rare currency attention spends without vanishing. Stories settle judgment. They let patience accumulate. They make the increments feel like steps instead of repetitions. So rather than pushing harder, you begin to curate the scenes that hold you. Not grand narratives. Just enough contour to recognize progress. A tiny plot. A recurring image. A label. See what it does. Wait. Notice how the day answers. And, quietly, ask yourself, what story will hold this work tomorrow?
There is a rhythm here. Strain shapes edges. Pause lets them knit. Practice hammers, rest tempers. A kiln needs both fire and cooling. So does learning. So does repair. Rest is not erasure. It is processing. Memory folds. Habits settle. Ideas rearrange themselves in the silence between attempts. Detachment is not defeat. It is strategic distance. It clarifies what deserves more force and what will grow if you simply wait.
Try listening for that thin boundary. Notice where tension thins into ease. Count the small returns. Then ask, without hurry, what happens when you meet the work with less force and a little more patience? After the push and the pause, the body asks for a shape. Rituals give it one. They are small. A breath before a task. A cup of tea that marks the hour. A single paragraph written, then set aside. These acts reduce friction. They translate intention into muscle memory. They cue attention without argument. Rituals do not need grandeur. They are instruments for the nervous system, gentle promises that something true will happen again. Over time, repetition turns edge into rhythm. The work becomes less of a battle and more of a practiced stance.
Try imagining one tiny, repeatable shape that could hold the next hour of your life. What would it feel like to meet the work this way? Rituals settle the body. They also bring up what we avoid. Resistance arrives quietly. A missed task. A suddenly urgent email. A thought that says, "Not today." These are signals, not verdicts. Failure shows its face the same way, small, ordinary, unavoidable. Shame lingers after, soft and sticky, asking us to hide.
Jung named this the shadow, the parts we exile. Frankl noticed how meaning can be found even inside suffering. Neither asks for denial. Both invite attention. Reconciliation is not tidy. It is peering at the margin. Naming what scares you. Letting a small practice hold the feeling without fixing it. Over time, the edge softens. The next ritual will be different because you met what resisted it.
What would change if you treated your failures as instructions, rather than punishments? If failures are instructions, experiments are the listening. Not grand plans. Small, low-stakes tests. A 10-minute ritual. One question asked differently. A deadline shortened. A rule loosened. Set a single, simple measure. It needn't be a chart. Note the feeling that follows. Note what drains you. Note what settles. These signals matter more than perfect metrics.
Tell a different story about yourself. Try on a line that's kinder, truer, less urgent. Act in small ways that prove it. Identity shifts slowly. It needs evidence, not pronouncements. Treat each attempt as data. Iterate. Reduce the stakes. Keep curiosity in the room. Let patience do some of the work. And then wait, quietly, to see what the world does with this new angle. What would you test this week, if you were allowed to be tentative? Choose one small thing. A single, steady gesture. Maybe a 10-minute ritual at the same hour. A compass in your pocket. A glass left on the windowsill as a marker of presence. Do it without fanfare. No scoreboard. No verdict. Notice how the body answers. Notice how attention rearranges itself around that single anchor. Some days it will feel like nothing. Other days, a thin thread will pull.
Let the work settle into a rhythm. Let meaning quietly do its aligning. Let patience be part of the experiment. Let the story about who you are soften, then tighten, then loosen again.
Hold the question lightly. What if progress is mostly about steadiness, not speed? And then wait. See what the room returns. You planted a small anchor. Now watch the motion around it. There is motion that is motion. Habit without variation. The hands move, the days blur. Little changes. Little learning.
There is frantic motion. Busy, loud, urgent. Many tasks. Little coherence. Energy spent like change in a jar. Noise, not vector. And there is shaped motion. Slow, attentive, with a frame. A clear question. Feedback that arrives immediate or delayed and nudges the next attempt. Practice that knows what it is testing.
Same hours. Different architecture. One yields familiarity. One yields exhaustion. One yields small, directional change. Notice which pattern you fall into. Notice where your attention naturally lands. And then, gently, choose how to steer. Meaning is not a slogan. It is an orienting force. Think of it as a subtle magnet. It bends attention. It narrows choice. It keeps you testing the same question, not just moving. When effort is guided by meaning, repetition stops being random. It becomes an experiment. Small failures illuminate. Tiny wins accumulate in a single direction. Endurance follows interest, not duty.
That is why frantic busyness often feels empty. There is energy, but no north. Shaped motion holds that north in view. It says, this is the question. This is the measure. Try again. Adjust. Wait. Meaning doesn't make work easy. It makes work intelligible. It preserves the thread. If you listen, you might hear what your efforts were asking for all along. What would that thread name today?
If meaning is the magnet, attention is the hand that follows. Attention is scarce. It slips. It is stolen by novelty, by the small alarms of the day, by the stories running under our thinking. Each diversion lets something else grow. That growth is quiet. It compounds. A repeated glance becomes skill. 100 scattered glances become noise. Guided attention changes the math. Narrow the aperture. Choose one place to notice. Test. Give that notice a simple measure. Let feedback arrive. You learn faster. You waste less. This isn't discipline as punishment. It's an economy. Where you place your gaze determines what you inherit.
Listen. There is a place your attention tends toward. What might unfold if you let it rest there a little longer? Attention finds targets. Identity decides which targets matter. We carry quiet stories about ourselves. Small, private narratives. The one who keeps trying. The person who quits. The curious one. The competent one. Those stories lean on each decision. They make some efforts feel natural, and others foreign. Jung called this the shadow, the parts we avoid. Frankl spoke of meaning that steadies us in suffering. Taken together, who we believe ourselves to be filters what we notice, and what we notice becomes practice.
So every action is a test. Not of will alone. Of identity. You act, and you answer a question. Who am I when nothing is watching? That answer is slow. It accumulates. It can be revised. Who do you want answering that question tomorrow?
If identity is the lens, structure is the frame. Structures turn stray effort into shape. Tiny feedback loops, a score, a note, a return draft act like mirrors. They show what changed. What didn't. Thresholds matter. Not heroic leaps, but the edge you can step over again and again. Deliberate practice is quieter than frenzy. It is repetition with small correction, like a potter's hand steadying the wheel. Systems cushion meaning. They translate an intention into repeatable motion. They keep your story from dissolving on hard days. So the question becomes practical, not moral. Which small loop will let your answer to who am I show up tomorrow? What scaffold will hold that experiment long enough to become habit, then habit long enough to alter the story?
If structures give shape, stories give the threads that pull shape through time. A daily ritual, a line in a journal, a small ceremony, they turn isolated acts into chapters. They make a score out of scattered notes. A return draft means more when it fits a narrative you can return to. Stories remember for you. They set what counts as progress. They forgive the awkward middle. They hold the tension between who you are and who you hope to become. Not by grand declarations, but by tiny reframings. A morning note that says, "I showed up," can re-anchor a week. A simple ritual can call your attention back to the same edge, again and again. And sometimes the story is quiet. A small, stubborn continuity. It asks only that you notice. What story will meet you at the next threshold?
And yet, ritual alone does not answer the tempo. There is a rhythm beneath effort. Sometimes you lean in. Sometimes you breathe out. Strain tightens focus. It sharpens edges. Surrender lets the work settle. Rest is not absence. It is a kind of listening. A kiln cools to finish the glaze. Muscles remember while the mind is still. Meaning decides which friction to hold. Which thresholds deserve pressure. Which hours need softness. This is not binary. It is an art of timing. Of small experiments. Of noticing when progress feels like pushing against yourself. And when it feels like opening a door.
What if the next step was knowing the difference? Progress, quietly, prefers signals over sermons. Small echoes return when you change one detail. A journal entry. A timed attempt. A question asked aloud. These are feedback, soft mirrors that tell you where the work lands. Thresholds are the doors those mirrors point to. Too high, and you hammer at the frame. Too low, and nothing shifts. Find the hinge that moves.
Practice is the patient turning of that hinge. Not endless repetition. Experimentation with attention. Adjust. Wait. Notice. Repeat with slight correction. If meaning is the compass, feedback is the map. It does not promise straight lines, but it shows the contours. What would you try tomorrow if you only listen for the smallest change? Stories are the rooms we return to. They give shape to scattered days. Not grand narratives. Small arcs. A morning page that ends with one clear note. A ritual cup, always at the same time. A label on a failed attempt that becomes a clue.
These are scaffolds for attention. They keep a thread where effort might fray. They let tiny returns accumulate into a sense of direction. Story doesn't prove meaning. It preserves the moment long enough to be seen. It also lets us edit what we are becoming. Gently. Without fanfare. So listen to the lines you repeat. Which one holds the next hinge open a little longer? Between pushing and pausing there is a thin, often unnoticed margin. We learn to value strain, the visible proof of trying. But quiet does something different. It lets the nervous system file what the effort unearthed. It lets mistakes settle into pattern. A walk. A nap. Closing the laptop. Small acts that feel like absence. They are not escape. They are part of the craft.
Surrender, here, is tactical. Not resignation, but allowance. You push until the edge, then you yield long enough for the edge to change shape. Sometimes progress is the echo of a pause. Listen to where you tighten. Listen to where you loosen. What lives in that loosened space, if you stayed with it a little longer?
Those loosened spaces, once tended, ask for a shape. Not a plan. Not a promise. A small, repeatable habit that meets the moment. A kettle boiled. A notebook opened in the same corner. 2 breaths before typing. A single stretch at the doorway. Little acts that translate pause into continuity. They lower the friction between intention and the body. They turn waiting into preparation, anxiety into calibration. Ritual is not performance. It's a soft architecture, cues, thresholds, sensory anchors. The weight of a mug. Light on your wrist. The sound that signals work has begun. Over time, these tiny structures bend attention without force. They let identity settle into muscle more than argument. What small ceremony could hold you tomorrow long enough for the next edge to change? Rituals do more than organize time. They bring into view what resists being organized. Failure often appears at that seam. Resistance is not merely laziness. It is an old engine, fear, habit, a bargain struck to keep something safe. Jung named those disowned parts the shadow. Frankl reminded us that suffering can point to what matters.
When resistance arrives, the first move is small: notice. Name the feeling. Lower the volume of judgment. Let the shadow sit beside the ritual, without performance. Quiet attention changes the shape of the obstacle. It becomes material. Something to test. Something to learn from, not a final verdict. There will be shame. Old bargains will surface. Allow them to be seen. Then, softly, ask, what does this part need to do its work? Then begin experimentally. Not with overhaul. With one small, awkward test. A morning ritual shortened. A task broken into 2 parts. A note left where shame used to sit. Watch. Not for success. For change in tone. For the parts that relax. For the parts that tighten. Treat each attempt like a clue. Collect them quietly. Let feedback arrive as sensation, as calendar, as conversation. Over time, these tiny tests shape a new story. Not instantly. Not perfectly. They invite a different question. Who do I become between attempts? Identity shifts by accumulation, not by declaration. There will be setbacks. Let them teach. Let them slow you down. And then, what small experiment would you run first, if failure were only information? Now watch what the trials reveal. Not metrics at first. Tone. Where your chest loosens. Where your mind tightens. The small differences in pace. The parts that feel like work, and the parts that feel like belonging.
Ask one quiet question after each attempt. Where did my attention go? What story ran beneath the doing? Notice the pulls: curiosity, dread, duty, delight. They are signals, not verdicts. Those signals begin to sketch a direction. Meaning grows not as a slogan, but as a subtle gravity that draws choices, focus, and time towards certain efforts and away from others. Over weeks, the small pulls become an axis. Listen to that axis. See what it steadies. See where it leads you next. That axis works through attention. Attention is a scarce currency. It's nudged by novelty, hollowed by habit, rerouted by the stories running in your head. The same hours can wear a groove or leave a scar, depending on where the gaze settles. Small, steady focus compounds. A page each morning. A single phrase returned to. A plant lit and watered. These are modest, directional acts. They do not shout. They accrete. Meaning is the compass. Attention is the path that follows. When attention is tended, choices gain shape. When it scatters, work becomes motion without movement.
So begin by noticing where your gaze lingers, where it flees. And then, quietly, let something receive it. What might start to change if you stayed a little longer? When your gaze settles, identity wakes. Who is doing the staying? We are not blank pages. We carry voices, old names, roles handed down, a private verdict about what we deserve. Those voices decide which efforts feel true. A morning page feels natural to the writer and absurd to the imposter.
Jung called the parts we deny the shadow, they tangle with will in quiet ways. Frankl reminded us that meaning can show itself even inside suffering, once it is named. So progress is less a list of tasks and more a slow negotiation with who you recognize yourself to be. Try a small act that answers to a different name. If you watched from that new place, what would you notice first?
If identity decides what feels true, structures decide what keeps happening. A threshold. A tiny, visible rule. A feedback pulse that arrives fast enough to matter. Think of a thermostat more than a light switch. Small adjustments, constant sensing. Deliberate practice is not heroic intensity. It is tight loops. Try. Sense. Correct. Try again. Feedback can be quiet. A page that reads easier. A chord that stops sounding wrong. The knot loosens a little. These micro returns teach a different grammar of effort. They rewire expectation. They shift the identity that watches. So set one small threshold. Lower the bar so you cross it frequently. Notice what the system tells you. Let the results speak. Wait. Then listen for the new story beginning to form.
Stories make stitches. They turn scattered returns into sequence. A journal entry. A short ritual at dawn. A label for the tiny win. These are not grand myths. They are punctuation, a frame that lets attention recognize progress. When you name a moment, it lodges. When you tell it again, it expects another. Narratives shape the next choice. They also invite forgiveness. A patchwork story tolerates awkward stitches. Over time, the pattern appears. Identity learns the scenes it will keep returning to. Listen now. What small narrative wants to gather these moments? Stories hold the stitches. Rest lets them set. You can push until the thread frays. Or you can pause and let the weave settle. Both are skillful moves. Both have timing. Rest is not absence. It is a different kind of attention. Quiet observation. Gentle testing. Letting sensation answer the question you're doing could not. Sometimes walking away shows where the work was trying to go. Sometimes yielding reveals a threshold you could not feel while straining.
So when do you lean in? When do you let go? And what does the quiet between those choices show you next? There is a quieter remedy. Rituals, small, repeatable acts, turn attention into habit. A breath before a page. A kettle brought to boil. A pen placed on the corner of a desk. They do not force meaning. They hold it. Rhythm teaches the nervous system what to expect. Thresholds shrink. What once felt large becomes approachable. Over time, those tiny repeats weave a shape around your days. They become the scaffolding that remembers when you do not. So look for one small thing you can bring back, again and again. Notice what it begins to protect.
And yet, rituals sit beside something quieter and harder. They protect momentum. They also protect stories we've outgrown. Resistance lives in the margins. Shame hides in familiar routines. Sometimes the thing you steady is the very pattern that stalls you. Not to blame, just to notice. There is a hidden economy to effort, motives, fears, debts unpaid to the self. Attend to them like weather. Observe without immediate repair. Integration is slow. It asks patience more than force. Let a small ritual meet a small reluctance. See what softens. See what questions remain. You don't need grand gestures. You need small, repeated motions that live in the body. A kettle boiled. A knot tied. A page turned. They bring attention back, not by force, but by habit. They lower the friction between wanting and doing. They carry memory of success, of pause, of calm. Over time, they become thresholds. You step through them and the day shifts. These acts don't answer the big questions. They orient you toward them. Notice which movements ease your center. Hold one for a week. See what opens. What lingers after the breath.
As those small thresholds become habit, something else often surfaces. not catastrophe. Not heroics. Little resistances. The ache that shows up before progress. A quiet critic. A shadow motive. Shame that tenses the hands. Old stories that reroute attention back to safety. They don't cancel the work. They bend its shape. Sometimes effort feels heavier because it's meeting a hidden architecture, fear, loyalty, an old identity refusing change. You can push. Or you can notice. Listen to the friction. Let questions rise without answering them all. See what wants to be integrated. What wants to be held. Then return. What if you became a careful experimenter? Pick one small change. Make it specific. Make it short enough to keep. Notice the first signals. A shift in attention. A loosening in the chest. A new friction. Record less. Observe more. Treat your sense of self as a working hypothesis. Tell a slightly different story. Test it gently. Let feedback arrive without drama. Iterate in small cycles. Failures become information. Progress becomes pattern. Over weeks, a quieter shape appears. Not sudden. Slow. Persistent. What might you try for 30 days?
Let those 30 days live inside a simple structure. One feedback loop. One small threshold you can cross without drama. Log a single detail. Pause. Adjust. Practice with attention, not force. Repeat until the movement feels less deliberate. Watch where effort meets resistance, too hard, too easy. Move the threshold by a hair. Small feedback, steady cadence, quiet compounding. Structures take scattered trying and give it shape. They let surprise and correction arrive slowly. Stay curious. See what the system shows next. Structure gave the work a stage. Story keeps you in the scene.
A narrative is not a headline. It's the gentle frame that makes small acts intelligible. It turns logs and thresholds into a thread. Rituals become beats. Failures become scenes, not verdicts. Identity slips into the gaps between sentences, who we are, in motion. Listen for the quiet plot that organizes your days. Notice which lines pull your attention. Which story makes a half step feel like progress? And which one steals your breath?
Sometimes you lean in. You tighten focus. You cross thresholds that need effort. Sometimes you step back. You let what you learn settle into the body. You give the nervous system time to unread the story it's been telling. Pause is not absence. Pause is part of the craft. It allows pieces to recombine. It reveals what really matters. So listen to the rhythm you've been following. Notice where strain repeats like a taut string. Notice where yielding might invite a truer next step. What would a deliberate pause do for this scene tomorrow?
Now notice the shape of effort. Some effort is motion without change, the hands move, the problem stays. Some is frantic busyness, urgent and diffuse, leaving exhaustion behind. Some is disciplined practice, slow, measured, returning to the same narrow difficulty until it shifts. Direction matters more than volume. A focused hour with feedback can outpace a week of scattered motion. Small frames, clear returns, and quiet adjustments tilt repetition into learning. The body keeps the score. The question is not how hard you try, but where the trying points. What small redirection might make tomorrow's effort land differently?
There is a quieter variable. Not louder effort, but the why that bends attention. Meaning is not a slogan. It's a frame. A small compass in the pocket. It selects which attempts stay. It decides what counts as feedback. It narrows choice. It steadies patience. Effort aimed without that axis scatters. Effort aimed with it accumulates. Tiny shifts in meaning change what you notice. They change how you respond to setbacks. Think of tomorrow's hour. Where would you point that compass? Distraction is not always loud. It is a sequence of small leaks. A ping. A wandering thought. A habit of noticing everything but nothing for long.
Where the light lingers, things change. Skills thicken. Errors clarify. Patterns emerge. Slow accumulation, not sudden force. Guided attention compounds like quiet interest in a single seam. So the question becomes softer. Not how hard will you try, but where will you choose to look tomorrow?
If attention is the lantern, identity is the hand that holds it. We carry scripts, family, failures, small triumphs. They quietly decide what counts as worth the light. Some tasks fit the script and feel inevitable. Others feel alien, even if useful. Jung named the parts we deny the shadow. Frankl found meaning threaded through suffering. Taken together, they point to a simple economy. Who you believe yourself to be governs what you keep returning to. Work, then, is rarely neutral. It is chosen, again and again. Which voice will steady your hand tomorrow?
So we move from who holds the lantern to how the light is shaped. Progress lives in patterns more than pushes. Feedback, quick, clear, turns blind repetition into learning. Thresholds, small enough to cross, turn dread into motion. Practice, patient and exacting, chisels skill without burning the spirit. Think of it as a scaffold. Not a sprint. Not a hammer. A sequence of gentle tests. Each one tells you a single truth. Adjust. Repeat. Wait. Over time the work changes you, and your tools change the work. Which first signal will you let reframe the next step?
If feedback and thresholds are the bones, story is the breath. It names why a single repetition matters. It draws a line between one day and the next. A ritual, a kept note, a private rule, these become chapters. They turn scattered motions into a shape you can follow. Stories don't demand grand meaning. They demand clarity. A small narrative narrows attention, steadies identity, makes change legible. Let one quiet story hold the work. See what that modest arc asks of you next. You learn a rhythm. Push. Pause. One day of strain. The next, quiet. Rest is not absence of work. It's the space where gains settle. When we stop forcing, the nervous system sorts. Edges become visible. Thresholds harden into habit. Surrender, sometimes, is a deliberate choice. Not defeat. A change of timing. Let the small story breathe. Notice where effort turns to noise. Observe where stillness shows the next line forward.
So we build small sanctuaries. A cup warmed in the morning. Tying a shoelace with intent. A 5-minute stretch before sitting down. These are not grand strategies. They are cues that carry meaning into muscle. Rituals shrink choice. They make attention habitual. They turn wanting into a simple motion. Over weeks, those motions accumulate. They become the scaffolding for larger change. Not by force. By repetition that feels like breath. Notice how a single small act can steady a whole day. Which tiny motion would you return to, again and again?
And yet, there is a shadow at the edge of routine. resistance arrives like a familiar ache. Shame and small, secret motives. Jung called it the shadow. Frankl taught us to listen for meaning in suffering. This isn't condemnation. It is material. Quiet, stubborn, usable. Attend to it slowly. What would happen if you turned toward that room? Gently. Without hurry.
From there, the work changes shape. It stops being raw and becomes a conversation. Small signals matter, feedback that is immediate and clear. Thresholds that are just reachable. Practice that is specific, patient, curious. Over time, tiny corrections fold into competence. Not a grand push. A steady shaping. Try one small threshold. Notice the feedback. See what it asks next.
Small stories do the holding. A marked page. A ritual cup of tea. A single line crossed off. They make gains legible. They braid scattered days into one thread. Narrative is not grand meaning. It answers a quieter question: why return? It orients attention. It keeps the conversation going. What quiet story will hold your next repetition? The threads that hold repetition also need slack. There is a rhythm, strain, release. We mistake constant pressure for progress. Sometimes yielding lets the work settle. A pause refines more than force alone. Rest reweaves what pushing phrase. It is not surrender. It is a form of attention. Notice the body's boundary. Notice the mind's soft decline. When do you lean in, and when do you step away?
After a pause, ritual arrives. Quiet repeats that ask little. A kettle's hiss. Fingers on a notebook. The same path home. These make attention habitual. They lower friction. They turn meaning into small, tactile evidence. Not dramatic. Not sudden. Just steady enough to notice change. What small, simple repeat could hold you here a little longer?
Rituals steady the hands. They make the work smaller. But steadying also reveals what was pushed aside. A stubborn ache. A soft voice that says it's not enough. Not failures to fix in a day. Signals, instead. They call for a different kind of attention. We lean into the ritual, and the shadow shifts shape. What might you notice there? Notice them. Not to fix immediately, but to map. A quiet inventory. Where the ache lives. What it asks for. Sometimes it wants shape. Sometimes it wants less. Sometimes it only wants witness. Try one small question. One tiny change. See how the ritual holds it. Give space. Wait. The answer may come in a gesture, a pause, or nothing at all. And then we return, still testing, still listening. Now, look at the shape of effort. Some is motion without change, a wheel turning. Some feels frantic, attention scattered like glass. Some curves slowly, steady practice, stripped of drama. Time alone does not decide. Direction does. Watch which pattern returns. See what it asks next.
Effort needs a line to follow. Meaning is that line. Not grand purpose, often a small, clarifying why that orients choices. It narrows attention. It sorts failures from noise. With meaning, repetitions accumulate towards something. Without it, intensity dissolves into motion. What quiet direction might your work be asking for next? Once a why settles, attention becomes the currency. We only have so much. Novelty and inner stories siphon it away. When attention is guided, it compounds, tiny acts that line up, day after day. Feedback then magnifies them. When it drifts, effort scatters. So the question shifts. What will you defend from distraction, long enough to let it change you?
The next filter is not technique, but who shows up to do the work. Identity is a quiet script. It decides which mornings feel possible, which actions persist. Jung named the shadow those hidden motives that bend a good intention. Frankl watched meaning outlast suffering. Shift that script gently. Small, believable rewrites alter a life's direction. What story are you willing to inhabit?
The story settles. But stories need scaffolding. Feedback becomes a quiet mirror. Small thresholds act like doors you can cross again. Deliberate practice is a slow hinge, not a sledgehammer. Over time, tiny corrections stack. Systems cradle effort. They turn a stubborn routine into real change. What first small signal would you notice and follow? We tell a quieter story. It doesn't inflate steps. It notices them. Rituals, journals, the way we recount a day, these are scaffolds for attention. They make small wins legible. Over months, a humble line appears where chaos once was. Which story would make your next small step visible?
Sometimes the next step is a pull. Sometimes it is a letting go. We learn to tell the difference not by force, but by listening. Rest is not absence of work. It is a way the nervous system sorts what mattered. Pause lets feedback settle. The body remembers what the mind ignores. Small strain, then softening. Rhythm, not heroics. And if you wait long enough, an answer often arrives that effort alone could not have uncovered.
Something about ritual binds attention to the body. A quiet sequence, boiling water, a pen closing a margin, and smoothing cloth, makes the day legible. These small, repeated motions lower friction. They become cues. They steady decisions. Not grand routines. Tiny anchors that ask only for presence. Over time they hold continuity where ambition fractures. You don't need drama. You need an anchor. What small motion might call you back tomorrow, and the tomorrow after that?
Rituals anchor us. Yet something else waits in the margins. Little resistances, an inward shrug, a postponed page, gather weight. Shame slips in, unnoticed. It doesn't cancel progress. It asks to be seen. Naming it softens it. Sometimes the next step is not doing more, but meeting the quiet place that resisted. What part of the work is still hiding in you?
You don't have to force it. Notice where the resistance lives, in the chest, the voice, the calendar. Gentle attention thins its edge. Often progress is rearrangement, not conquest. Sometimes the next step is a small, honest yes. Listen. Wait. What would that yes sound like? Some motion is repeated without aim, like clock hands circling, never landing. Some feels urgent, a frantic ledger of tasks. Some is practice, precise, patient, shaped by small feedback. Direction, not intensity, decides what changes. Which kind are you tending now?
Effort without alignment is noise. Meaning is the slight angle that turns repetition into direction. Not a slogan. A practical lens, it narrows attention, shapes choices, filters friction. When what you do answers a quietly held why, endurance changes form. Small failures become signals. Paths converge. You notice fewer distractions. It does not promise outcome. It simply reorients where you aim. What quiet meaning might already be steering you? When meaning tilts your action, attention follows. Attention is the scarce currency of change. It is spent in small acts, a focused hour, a repeated choice, a patient return. Distractions tax it. Novelty devours it. Over time, guided attention compounds like water carving stone. Where do you spend yours, in the rush, or on the quiet line that holds direction?
Attention follows identity. The quiet story you carry: I'm the kind of person who decides what endures. Jung named a shadow of unacknowledged motives. Frankl showed meaning holds in suffering. These narratives pick the efforts that stick and those that drift away. So progress is partly grammar, the self you speak into being. You don't just practice, you become someone who returns. What small line of self would change the work you keep coming back to? Identity steers attention. Structure shapes result. Feedback is the quiet mirror. Small thresholds signal possibility. Deliberate practice stitches skill into habit, measured, imperfect, patient. Thresholds keep attempts scalable. That loop closes the gap. Over time, tiny corrections reorient trajectory. So the work you become is also the system you inhabit. What modest loop would change what you return to?
A loop needs a frame. Left unframed, increments feel like noise. A quiet story gives them shape. Rituals, marginal notes, a single phrase, small anchors that turn scattered attempts into a line. They translate repetition into meaning. They hold your attention when the next step is thin. What story will notice the tiny change you keep making? A frame asks for a different kind of labor. Not all effort is the same. There is endless motion, busy hands, no course. There is disciplined practice, small margins, deliberate limits. And there is frantic doing, chasing novelty. Direction matters more than volume. A slight tilt in aim changes what repetition builds. Which tilt is quietly closing the distance now?
The tilt needs a reference. Motion without direction is noise. A quiet axis, a reason that feels true, pulls attention, trims choices, extends patience. Meaning doesn't sparkle, it settles. It becomes an orienting weight. It decides what to keep and what to let go. Over time, small repetitions stop scattering. They accumulate. Not by force, but by steady alignment. Where that axis rests, the shape of progress quietly changes. Meaning funnels attention. Attention is the currency that pays for change. When the reason is clear, hands and eyes follow. Distraction is cheap and loud. Focus is quiet and accumulates. Small choices, what you look at, what you answer, what you return to, compound like interest. Over years, habitual noticing becomes the architecture of life. Notice that. Where's your attention going now?
Attention lands where a self already exists. Identity is that quiet claim, the stories we live inside. Sometimes inherited, sometimes chosen. Jung named a shadow. Frankl showed meaning as orientation. Who arrives at the table, at the practice, at the hard conversation? Which small story keeps returning, steady and stubborn? Listen for that voice. Who is doing the work?
Structure answers the question identity asks. Feedback becomes a mirror. Thresholds mark where effort changes shape. Deliberate, small repetitions teach the system what to keep. Not dramatic corrections. Soft calibrations. Moments where failure gives a signal, not shame. Practices that invite revision. Invisible habits that steer attention. Over time, these loops accumulate. Quietly. What small loop might catch you tomorrow?
Stories gather the scattered work. They stitch small loops into a line. A morning ritual. A sentence in a notebook. A memory sharpened into purpose. They decide which failures call for revision, which call for rest. Over months, a story gives rhythm to attention. Not heroic. Quiet continuity. What story are you telling the work right now? And what shifts if you simply listen?
You build a quiet story, and then what? There is a moment when pushing no longer refines skill. It densifies strain. Progress needs a different act, yielding. Rest is not absence of work. It is the mind rearranging itself. Small withdrawals reveal patterns. Sometimes the next useful step arrives in silence. What might come if you stayed still a little longer?
You rest. Patterns rise like light through blinds. Tiny rituals take that light and hold it. A morning cup, a folded page, a breath counted before a task. Not dramatic rites. Small acts that lower the threshold to begin. They move meaning from idea into muscle. Over months they shape what you notice. What small, habitual thing might begin to hold your attention tomorrow?
Still. Habits meet something quieter, resistance. Old stories surface, shame, doubt, the small voice that magnifies a missed day. These are not failures to erase. They are traces, signals. If met with curiosity rather than judgment, they change the shape of practice. Listen. What would those quiet complaints ask of you next?
Underneath those complaints, another voice, identity, waits quietly. It decides which returns matter. Small narratives become filters. We try on roles. Some fit, others strain. Changing them is slow work. It asks for patience, for small experiments, for a different question: who, exactly, do you want to be when the work finally shows up? Identity chooses the work. Structures shape what the work becomes. Feedback is honest light. Thresholds mark where small wins compound. Practice is not effort alone but pattern, repeat, notice, adjust. Build loops that welcome error. Keep steps just heavy enough to require attention, light enough to repeat. Over time, the edges smooth. Habit and measurement quietly align. Progress stops being lucky. It becomes a conversation. What would your next loop sound like? Listen to the way you tell the work. A story makes chores coherent. Rituals frame tiny gains as chapters. Journaling folds days into shape. Stories keep attention from wandering. They turn scattered attempts into something that looks like progress. You don't need an epic. You need a line to follow. What story will hold your next small, uncertain step? After a story holds a step, the work itself asks for a rhythm. Push. Pause. Push again. Strain gives shape. Rest allows the shape to settle. Often we treat rest as absence. It is an act of listening instead. A deliberate loosening. That loosening lets what you've begun reorganize. So where do you push and where do you yield? Push when the work pushes back, a phrase reshapes, a mistake teaches, a problem narrows. Yield when your senses dull, when effort feels like noise, not signal. Use small thresholds. Test gently. Let feedback accumulate. Trust the body's quiet signals: curiosity, irritation, relief. Then wait. See what the space between strain and surrender produces. After the wait, the body remembers. Small gestures mark time. A cup of tea. A pen touching paper. 5 slow breaths. These are anchors, not ornaments. They lower the cost of starting. They make the next choice easier. Practice with tenderness. Stay with what loosens inside you. Notice what tightens, what unwinds. What small gesture might hold you tomorrow?
Those small gestures become the hinge. But effort wears many shapes. There is busyness, fast hands, no new ground. There is rote repetition, motion that circles the same hill. And there is directed practice, small, uneven steps, guided by a clear line back to meaning. Direction matters as much as time. Structure brings feedback. Over weeks, choices compound. What shape is your effort forming now?
There is a quieter force. Meaning points. It narrows where attention lands. It decides which failures teach and which are distractions. With meaning, small adjustments accumulate into shape. Without it, effort scatters bright, exhausted, directionless. Meaning is not speed. It's a compass. It doesn't promise results. It clarifies which doors to open tomorrow. What would change if you let it steer, just a little? Attention is a small currency. It leaks. It compounds. Meaning acts like a selector. It chooses the accounts where you deposit time. A notification steals pennies. A ritual collects interest. Over months, the balance shapes what you can do. Watch where your gaze returns. Notice what costs you the most. Where does your attention go when nothing else demands it?
Attention betrays identity. The things you return to quietly narrate who you are. A tired person becomes the person who keeps returning. Jung imagined a shadow that holds the parts we won't claim. Frankl noted meaning outlives circumstance. Our inner narrator assigns effort to roles: parent, maker, survivor, imposter. When that assignment fits, actions last. When it doesn't, they fray. So the question shifts. Not how much you work, but who is doing the work.
So who is doing the work? They need structure. A feedback loop that tells truth. A threshold small enough to cross. Practice shaped by clear return, not brute repetition, but correction. Little systems that translate intention into repeated, meaningful change. They frame identity. They keep attention from wandering. They temper will with limits. They let skill accumulate quietly. And then, somewhere between a clear signal and a patient threshold, something shifts. What small structure do you come back to tomorrow? Small systems need a story to sit inside. Without one, the day's corrections feel like noise. A simple narrative, who we are becoming, the problem we're solving, gives moments a thread. It doesn't have to be grand. A line, repeated. A headline for the day. That thread collects attention. It makes thresholds meaningful. Over months, the fragments line up into a chapter. What's the sentence you tell yourself when you open the door tomorrow? A ritual is tiny architecture. It meets decision at the threshold. Pouring coffee. Lacing shoes. Closing the desk drawer. These gestures steady attention. They turn intention into feelable habit. Over weeks they thicken into rhythm. They guard the story you told yourself. Not dramatic. Quiet scaffolding. Try one small motion tomorrow. Notice what it holds. See how long it keeps you honest.
Those small rituals steady the hand. But something still tugs. Resistance arrives soft and familiar, procrastination, doubt, the voice that shrinks a small win. Shame lives there too, folded into old stories. Name it calmly. Let the pull be material, not verdict. When we meet the shadow without armor, progress stops being only forward motion. It becomes rearrangement. What might we make space for, if we listen first?
When we listen, rearrangement becomes work you can feel. A small probe. A quiet test. Patient attention to what answers back. Thresholds kept low. Feedback gathered without drama. Over time, those tiny experiments sketch a new shape of skill, of habit, of self. Not a destination. More like a doorway. Which door will you open? Step back. Let the experiments sit and breathe. Look at the map they're drawing. Not a final route. More a compass. A slow rhythm that steadies body and attention. Small windows open, a page in the morning, a walk, a well-worn gesture. Let these signs gather. Let them settle into the margins of your day. Then wait. See what answers when you stop steering so hard. Now notice the patterning. A habit that returns. A thought that loosens. The small frictions that no longer catch you. Catalog these signs without hurry. Let them inform a quieter steering. Adjust one thing. Keep the rest. Progress shows up as stubborn shapes, recurring choices, recurring relief. Let them speak. Then hold space and listen. What asks to be tended next? Some effort circles. It fills time. Motion without direction. Other effort hones. Repetition with shape. It carves a groove you can return to. And there is frantic effort, busy, urgent, dispersed. It exhausts but rarely accumulates. Discipline feels different again. It is patient, bounded, merciful to itself. Notice which you practice. Which of these leaves something behind? Which dissolves into noise? Let that question sit.
Let that question sit. Something subtle turns repeated motion into progress. Not more sweat, but a bearing. Meaning acts like a compass. It orders choices. It channels attention. Small acts stop scattering and begin to stack. Effort finds rhythm. Momentum gathers quietly. What would your work become if it had a direction to live by?
Attention is a scarce currency. It pays for what endures. Yet it slips away, chased by novelty, by habit, by the stories in our head. Meaning narrows the ledger. It makes choices clearer. Small, repeated allocations compound into shape. If attention is your capital, what will you invest in, and what will you quietly stop funding? Attention chooses. Identity decides. You can spend hours on a task, but whether it endures depends on the self that shows up. The narratives we carry, quiet claims about who we are, grant permission or withdraw it. Jung named parts of this the shadow. Frankl showed meaning can hold when everything else fails. So progress often shifts through a change of self. Who, quietly, is doing the work now? Once the self shows up, structure takes over. Feedback becomes a quiet mirror. Thresholds mark where effort turns into skill, small enough to meet, hard enough to teach. Practice moves with patience, patterning habit more than rushing change. Progress lives in responsive loops: act, notice, adjust, repeat. Not sudden triumphs. Slow refinements. What small loop would change tomorrow's return? A story steps in to hold the loop. Not an epic, but a small arc, a morning phrase. A ritual that notices small gains. It gives edges to wandering attention. It makes the next return intelligible. What quiet story might hold your next step?
Let a single, modest measurement answer you. A habit becomes a signal. Thresholds stay small. Feedback arrives soft and early. Over time, the story thickens. You notice what holds. You keep returning. What will that first quiet signal tell you? You lean toward it. You listen. The signal is not a verdict. It is a map, uneven, partial. You adjust. A tiny habit nudges the story. Time gathers. Patterns thicken. Then you wait. See what shifts. See what refuses to. Feedback comes as quiet corrections. Small thresholds decide whether an effort becomes a habit. Practice is patient repetition, not force. Lower the bar. Make the test small. Notice the response. Let silence hold the change. Then, try again, gently. What will register next?
Small feedback needs a frame. Storycraft gives it one. A line you tell yourself. A ritual that names the next step. Narrative turns scattered tries into a curve you can follow. It keeps attention from wandering. It makes tiny wins matter. What story will receive this new habit?
A story holds a tiny ritual. It names the step. Over time it softens the edges of failure. Then rest becomes part of the form. Not absence, but a contour that lets change settle. There are moments to strain, and moments to let go. What will you let rest teach?
We come back to small, repeatable acts. A cup poured. Hands that tidy. Breath counted. These tiny rituals ease decision, redirect attention, make alignment ordinary. Not overhaul. Just anchors. Over months they accrete meaning. Try one quietly. See what continues. Which small motion might carry you forward.
Then resistance arrives. The small ritual meets a quiet hesitation. Old stories surface. Shame taps the shoulder. Notice it, without fixing. The shadow is not failure. It's material to listen to. Sometimes the work looks like stepping back. Sometimes it looks like staying. What wants to be learned here? We sit with the hesitation. We name it without fixing. Small experiments replace heroic fixes. A pause becomes useful data. Movement returns, altered, quieter. Often the next step is softer than we imagined. So we wait a little longer. We notice. Then, what wants to be tried next?
We test gently. A small task. A new boundary. We watch not for success, but for where attention lingers. Ease. Friction. A quiet aversion. Those are signals. They tell us more than effort. We hold them. We learn. Then we let the next impulse find its shape. We watch the test like a slow instrument. Patterns emerge. A point of resistance. A hint of flow. We tune one variable. Small thresholds shift. Over weeks, tiny changes reorient momentum. Then we wait. See what truth the silence offers. Meaning arrives not as thunder, but as a tilt. It narrows what we look for. It weighs choices. Over time, attention accrues where meaning points. We adjust. We notice. And then, what else settles into that new field? Small habits gather there. Attention behaves like currency. Each glance, each choice, deposits a little weight. Distraction quietly withdraws it. Guided focus compounds, slowly shaping what's visible. Over time, noise gives way to contour. Which patterns did you fund today? Small deposits trace a habit. Behind them is a quiet author. The stories you whisper to yourself choose where attention settles. Identity is not fixed. It is a habit, too. It leans towards certain efforts and away from others. Notice which self shows up. Who are you becoming in the small choices? Now notice the mechanics beneath intention. Small signals offer course correction. A quiet feedback loop. Thresholds that feel like doors. Practice is patient repetition, not strain. Each correction reshapes habit. Over time, margins open. What tiny echo would you follow tomorrow? We begin to tell a story. Not grand arcs. Small threads, a morning page, a return draft, a closed loop of feedback. These threads hold attention. They make us expect, remember, return. Over time, the story shapes what we notice. What line would you begin to follow?
Effort takes shapes. There is restless motion, doing to do. There is steady ritual, return with intent. There is disciplined practice, narrow, patient, designed. Direction changes outcome more than volume. Motion without an edge dissipates. Tended effort accumulates. Notice which shape you keep. Meaning is not a reward. It's a vector. It gives direction to motion. A tired repetition becomes practice when it answers to something larger. It focuses attention, trims choices, steadies endurance. That subtle north, felt more than declared, turns motion into accumulation. Imagine following that line for a season. What shifts?
If a compass points you, attention pays the fare. We have a limited ledger of focus. Distractions skim it away. Gentle, consistent choosing lets small gains compound. A single steady gaze overturns scattered motion. Notice where your eyes, thoughts, and hours rest. What do you keep returning to? And what slips away?
After attention comes the one who attends. Identity is quieter than will. It is the story you wake into each morning. Small scripts decide which tasks feel like home and which feel foreign. When your actions align with that quiet narrative, they persist. When they don't, effort thins. Change asks for a different self, not only a different schedule. Who do you become in the doing? When identity shifts, structures answer. Small feedback. Clear thresholds. Gentle practice that respects your edges. Not brute force. Systems that show you what's real. Repeat. Adjust. A threshold crossed quietly changes the story you wake into. Notice where you hesitate and what could be measured next.
When thresholds shift, the story reshapes. Small narratives, a ritual, a morning note, stitch moments into a line you can follow. They keep attention where it matters. They also reveal what we haven't yet named. Often the small rituals expose what we hide. Resistance arrives soft or sharp. It isn't failure. It's a signal, fear, shame, old bargains. We lean in without fixing. We learn to meet the knot. Integration takes time. Breathe. Let whatever surfaces be noticed. There is more to listen for. Then, quietly, we test. Small experiments. Soft hypotheses about how we act and what holds. We measure by feeling more than metrics. We change one thing. Wait. Notice what resists. Adjust. Repeat. Over months the contour shifts. Not dramatic. Gradual. And always, a question remains: what will show up next? Slow down. Let the experiments rest. Picture a faint compass. A slow rhythm in the ribs. A window with light that returns. Progress as small geographies of attention. No grand verdict. Only steady tending. Stay curious, not urgent. What will look different when you return? When you come back, look for one small difference. A line on the page. The way light rests on the cup. Measure less. Notice more. Let a single detail hold your attention. Then wait. See how the world answers.
Not all motion becomes change. Sometimes we move in circles, busy hands, the same pattern. Sometimes we practice, slowly, with a shape, repetition, a small correction each time. Notice the difference. One feels hollow. One gathers its own gravity. Effort finds direction when it allows error and a place to return. Watch which kind takes you further. There is a different compass. Not force, but meaning. When effort aligns with a question that matters, attention arranges itself. Tasks become magnets. Fatigue changes shape. Small steps accumulate into trajectory. Meaning doesn't make work easy. It makes direction visible. And then we begin to know where to lean.
Attention is the quiet currency of change. It drifts, fragments, returns. Meaning acts like a subtle magnet, not forcing, simply inviting focus where trajectory forms. Compounded, small moments become a path. So we watch, and choose, and learn where to place that fragile light. Who holds the light? Often, it is our self-story. Small narratives decide what counts as worth tending. They filter attention like an old map, showing certain paths, folding others away. Change asks not only for effort, but for a different storyteller inside. We can listen, rewrite a line, see what begins to follow.
If the storyteller shifts, who speaks? Identity is quieter than a label. It is the tiny confirmations we accept, the gestures we repeat. Each repetition names us a little more. Failures and the gentle returns count as evidence. We can watch who answers the next time and learn to listen. Structures decide how a habit becomes a skill. Feedback is a quiet mirror. Small thresholds invite return. Deliberate repetition reshapes attention, not by force but by contour. Thresholds keep motion within reach. Over time they braid into competence. Notice the small signals. See what answers, and then what asks back.
Feedback and thresholds become a quiet archive. Stories give them shape. A journal entry, a ritual, a repeated line, they stitch moments into a visible path. Suddenly small returns read as chapters, not noise. They hold attention. They ask for an answer. Which story will stay with the work? The story that holds the work sometimes asks us to stop. Not defeat, but to listen. To let a muscle settle. To give feedback time to land. Strain and surrender form a rhythm. One primes the other. Rest is not absence. It is part of the task. When do you begin to breathe into the gap? A small ritual changes the shape of work. A breath before the page. A measured walk. Repetition makes the body unsurprised by effort. These gestures reduce friction. They do not promise results. They simply make showing up quieter, more exact. And then, what notices the change? A small witness notices. Not the busy mind, but a quieter edge and attentive ledger that keeps track of what feels true. It doesn't measure hours. It names significance. That naming tilts motion into direction. Quietly, a purpose takes shape. What will it call you toward next?
Not all effort is the same. Some is motion, busy, repeating. Some is practice, directed, small, patient. Over weeks, direction compounds. A few chosen acts bend the unknown toward form. What shifts next? Meaning arrives as an orienting light. It selects, holds, and quietly arranges attention. Effort aligned becomes accumulation. Hold that question. What are we letting it orient toward? It narrows the field. It chooses what survives the day. Over weeks, small, guided attention compounds into visible change. Not through force, but through quiet accumulation. What, then, do we tend? We tend what feels true to us. Not just tasks, patterns, small promises kept to ourselves. Over time, those promises become the rules we live by. Pay attention to them. See which ones refuse to fade, and ask why. Those rules shape who we become. They decide which efforts endure. Identity is quieter than intention. It whispers, selects, keeps score. Sometimes inherited, sometimes invented. Listen. What story is choosing you now? Structures answer quietly. Feedback, tiny thresholds, steady repetition. They correct and clarify. Notice what draws your attention back. See where correction feels true, then linger.
Stories do the quiet work. They bind scattered days into a single arc. A small ritual, a start, a stumble, a small reveal keeps attention tethered. Let a private story unfold. See what stays.
Small rituals gather. They nudge the self, shape a border between wanting and becoming. Sit with that shift. Learn what you return to, and why. They become soft scaffolds. A breath before action. A kettle, a notebook, a step. Over time they rewire what feels natural. Notice which ones hold. Notice which fall away. Ask quietly, what wants to remain? Meaning moves slowly. Not thunder, but a faint compass. It orients attention. Small choices, repeated, tilt the horizon. Stay near those tilts. Watch where they lead.
Over months, those small tilts accumulate. Not a leap. A shoreline rearranged by patient tides. Attend to the quieter returns. Let the work show its shape. Over time, patterns appear. Not always dramatic. Small proofs arrive, a habit held, a door opened. Notice them. Let meaning orient you, quietly. And wonder where the next slow tilt will lead. Tend the small proofs. Choose curiosity over urgency. Stay with the slow tilt a little longer, watch what loosens, what deepens. Let patterns speak. Return with gentle attention. Notice what resists, what thins away. Follow the small thresholds that open. Hold a quiet wonder for where meaning begins to gather. Watch how effort reshapes when it's guided. Small choices align like compasses. Movement slows. Direction matters more than volume. Try one small reorientation. Stay with what dissolves. See what opens next.
Meaning arrives quietly. Not a banner, but a compass. It narrows the restless scatter. Suddenly small choices hold weight. What, then, begins to care enough to continue? Attention does. Where it rests, small things gather force. It chooses scenes, keeps the hand steady, makes habit possible. Yet attention is thin. It leaks into novelty, noise, old stories. How we guard it, quietly, decides whether meaning becomes motion.
Attention needs an owner. Who we say we are, the small, repeated story directs where we return. Identity is less badge than habit, a gravity that permits some efforts and cancels others. What parts of you keep showing up? Identity decides what returns. Structures shape the outcome. Small feedback loops. Manageable thresholds. Deliberate, patient practice that registers error and adjusts. Notice which systems hold you and what still slips away. A story holds attention like a harbor. Small scenes, repeated cues, a voice that remembers the pattern. They make gains feel continuous. Which story do you let carry your days? Stories steady the path. Yet progress breathes between pushes. Rest is not absence but calibration. Let tension loosen, watch what returns. What arrives when you stop forcing? A small rearrangement happens. Patterns settle. Attention leans without strain. The next step feels less like pushing, more like answering. Wait. Listen. See what reorders itself and what quietly refuses to stay. Meaning arrives quietly. Not a slogan, but a direction, subtle, steady. It reshapes attention. Choices thin. Effort finds a line to follow. And you notice what you keep returning to, without explanation. There is room to be surprised.
Attention becomes the currency. Quiet choices, what you look at, what you ignore, compound over months. Each redirected gaze shapes where progress appears. Those repeated gazes become habits. They settle into a quiet story about who you are. That story chooses which efforts persist. It narrows possibilities and keeps others out. And sometimes, it hides itself, waiting to be noticed.
When you name that quiet story, it loosens its grip. Identity shifts imperceptibly. Small choices begin to land differently. Not instantly. Not cleanly. But attention retunes. And then, something else takes hold. Attention reshapes small moments, a shifted habit, a halted complaint, a different question. Progress arrives not with fanfare but as slow light, accumulating. Pause. Notice what subtle correction waits to be seen. Ask, who carries this attention? The stories we live by steer small corrections into lasting change. Listen. Identity is quieter than intent, but it decides which efforts return. Structures shape that quiet self. Small feedback, readable thresholds, steady repetition, these are the scaffolds that let intention become habit. Watch one pattern. See where it bends. What holds it? What lets go? A story turns scattered steps into a path. It names beginnings in shadows. It keeps attention from wandering. Tell the small, true sequence. Then watch how meaning gathers and stays. Naming a practice slows attention. Small rituals anchor the next step. Gradually, identity threads tighten not by pushing, but by having fewer directions to drift. Sit with what remains. Notice what calls you back.
Something quieter lingers. Old resistance. Hidden motives that tug at purpose. They are not failures. They are material. Learn their shape. Then listen. See what answers back. You don't erase the shadow. You sit with it. Tender attention reshapes habit. Answers come as small shifts. Sometimes a softened choice. Sometimes silence. Wait. See what moves next.
So you return. Not to fix, but to attend. A small ritual, hands on the table, a steady breath. The slow work of alignment. Wait. See what opens. Slowly, you notice the difference between motion and direction. Some movements are habit. Others are chosen. Feel how attention tilts, small changes, improbable shifts. Stay with that tilt. See where it leads. Now ask, what guides that lean? Not force, but a quiet orientation, values, questions, small promises kept. Let them act like a compass. Follow one. See what opens and what stays stubbornly closed. Effort takes forms. There's restless motion, busy hands, no course. There's patient craft, small, deliberate strokes that build shape. And there's frantic pushing that scatters energy. Notice the shape you habitually choose. Beneath motion sits a quieter force, meaning. It turns scattered labor into a course. Not a slogan. A felt direction. Aligned, effort compounds. Unaligned, it drifts. What small true north orients you?
Meaning asks for attention. Attention is finite. Where we place it, things grow. Small, steady noticing becomes traction. A single redirected glance can change a year. What do you decide to see next? Attention is small. It compounds. One quiet choice redirects months. Distractions siphon more than we think. The work is tending the doorway, gentle, patient. Not force, but stewardship. Which doorway do you keep open tonight? Inside that doorway lives a voice. Not goals, stories. Identity arranges small returns. It decides which effort becomes ritual. Who keeps coming back to this quiet work?
That voice keeps a ledger. Tiny confirmations. A quiet signal that this matters. Not proof. A felt yes. It pulls you back.